Today I'm going to have a talk with Pete Hamill. Pete is the author of the book Embodied Leadership. It's about the somatic approach to developing your leadership. I found it a really interesting read, and in the interview he will cover a few of the topics he describes in his book. And in the book he gives a lot of insights and a lot of practical tips and tools to develop your own leadership style. I hope you will enjoy the interview, and it will give you a lot of new insights like it has been given me. That's a nice switch to the next word in your title, because we have to let go of control and we have to take leadership, and your title is talking about embodied leadership.
Yeah.
I think for you that will be the key, or is the key, I read it in your book, to become the leader you're talking about prior to this. I think for some people so the embodied part won't be known, so it will be a new word for them. Can you explain something about what embodied state or embodied leadership is?
Okay.
So what's different from normal leadership?
Okay. Well, there's two ways of thinking about embodied. The first is the easier one, so I'll stick with that first,
Yep.
And then we'll go on to the more complicated one. So the first one is embodied as a level of learning. And what we mean by that is lots of people go on leadership programs and learn lots of models.
Mm-hmm.
And they come out of those programs and they have a model. And then they're thrown in the midst of a situation, or the boss says, "Can I see you in my office?" Or something happens, a crisis happens. And all of a sudden, that model goes out the window. All of a sudden, we're reacting on instinct, we're reacting on our conditioning, we're reacting on what we know at a very deep, fundamental, embodied level. What we embody the ability to do, what we embody the capacity and capability to do, that's what tends to respond. And afterwards they go back, maybe just the file from the program just sits getting gathering dust on the shelf, but maybe they go back and they look at it and they look at that model and they think, wow, okay, well that would have been really good in that situation if I'd been able to think about this and do something else. But of course in those moments, we don't have lots of capacity to rationally think things through and to take lots of time and to do stuff, because actually what's happening in those moments is our brain biochemistry, our whole body's hormone system is kicking in and sending us into a pattern of responding upon what we know historically has worked in these situations, which is not about theories and models the rational mind has absorbed, but it's about what we know how to concretely do. Mm-hmm. The model and the theory is great, but do I actually know how to do something concretely different in practice or not? And so embodied leadership is, there's a lot of leaders I meet, or a lot of people in leadership positions I meet, I should say, who know the models and the theories, have memorized them, can talk about them, know all the language. Mm-hmm. But in those moments, what comes out of them is their history and the past and what they've done before. Mm-hmm. And all of that nice models and theories kind of stays in the books and in the papers and in the binders from the programs and etc. It stays there. Yeah. And so embodied leadership is about embodying the capacity to lead genuinely, to do something different than you were previously able to do that consistently, and to do it when under pressure. That's the level of learning that we're talking about in embodied leadership, which is not about memorization, knowing about, having heard about, being able to use the words, but about being able to respond differently in those crunch moments. Yeah. Now, that is a very different level of learning than most leadership development programs aim for. And when you think about it, that requires something very different, because actually we know how to do the memorization, heard about, know about, kind of have that model in my rational head. We know how to do that very easily. We can sit, we can do PowerPoint slides, and we can have conversations about it, and we can do brief exercises that illustrate the point, and etc. etc. And we know how to do that. Very easy, very simple, and we know that we'll absorb it at that kind of level. How do we absorb it at the level where I concretely know how to do something different? That's where the second part of embodied starts to come in. And actually what we start to really know is that to do that, what we need to start to do is engage with the body. which is a little bit weird within our culture. Because within our culture, what we've historically done is we've separated off and we've said that we are our rational minds. You know, we have, philosophically speaking, we have Descartes to thank for this from back in the 16th century.
Yeah.
But we separated that off, and we are our rational minds, and the rational mind is the bit that's important, and that rational mind is the bit that, you know, is all kind of making all the decisions and rational and all of that sort of stuff. And if we educate the rational mind, that's what's important. But what we see is when we're educating the rational mind, it's not actually making a difference because people are coming back and still responding based upon their history and what they know how to do and what's embodied in. So something's missing in that model of how we see ourselves as human beings. Something is fundamentally missing. That rational mind is not the answer. And so if we start to go beyond that, we start to say, well, actually, what do we know from neuroscience, from biochemistry? What we start to see is that a lot of neuroscientists these days say that the distinction between the brain and the body is a bit of a myth. That they don't really see a dividing line, a clear point of difference between one or the other, because the brain connects to the spinal cord, connects to the entire nervous system, which connects to the muscles, which connects to everything. And actually, where does one stop and the other begin? What do we do about the fact that there are more neurons in our guts than there are in a cat's brain? You know, these kinds of things, we start to not your head that there's an entire system here, and this entire system works together. That the brain impacts the body to release hormones, which then send messages back to the brain, and the brain just doesn't wire itself directly through it. It's really interesting. And if we think about it, then how do we start to change and work with ourselves to develop leadership? Then we start to think, well, actually, the body seems to be playing a role in cognition. It seems to be playing a role in figuring out what we do. Now, that's kind of quite a radical idea in terms of our traditional concepts of mind, brain, who we are as human beings, etc. But there's a great experiment. Antonio Damasio was working as a neuroscientist. We're working with some people who the parts of their brain that were enabled them to have contact with their bodily sense of their emotions. Because we feel our emotions in our body. They happen below the chin. They don't happen up here like ideas. They happen in our body. And they were unable to feel that. And he was talking about how they were unable to make decisions. Now that's interesting. They could rationalize and they could write all the pros and cons down for any decision they had to make whatsoever. But when it came down to it, even such a simple decision as, should I have our next meeting at this time or this time? They couldn't decide. When we write all those pros and cons down in a very rational way, how do we weight them? We weight them against what we want, which is what we emotionally feel. And if we're into our emotions, well, we're back into the body. Wow, okay. So we're back into that territory where even decision-making, where we like to think of ourselves as rational human beings. Make rational decisions. Actually, so then we're starting to get a different sense of what it is for us to make decisions, take action in the world. Our whole sense of human cognition from neuroscience is changing, and it's radically changing. And it's radically changing from a view of a rational human being, a brain-led, rational, technical approach to the system of a body where the hormones and the endocrine system going through the body has a massive impact upon our abilities to take decisions, to take action in the world, our abilities to do different things. And then we're in a very different territory for what it is to develop ourselves as leaders. We're in a very different territory to understand and that for me is the embodied piece, is we're taking into account that whole system.